I stood in our kitchen watching Dad count the same stack of crumpled bills for the third time. His hands shook as he smoothed out a 20 that looked like it had been through the washing machine twice. 8,000, he said without looking up. We need 8,000 by the end of the month. The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd known things were bad, but hearing the actual number made my stomach drop. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million for us. What happens if we don't get it? I asked. Dad finally looked at me. His eyes had that hollow look they'd gotten over the past year, like someone had drained all the fight out of him. We lose the farm, the house, everything. Mom sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded in her lap. She hadn't said a word since Dad started his counting ritual, just stared out the window at the fields we might not own much longer. Her arthritis had been acting up again, and I could see the pain in the way she held her shoulders. There's got to be something we can do, I said. Dad shook his head and went back to counting. 47, 48, 49. He paused. Same as last time. The bills looked pathetic, spread out on our worn kitchen table. Mostly ones and fives, a few tens. That beat up 20. Probably tip money from Mom's old waitressing job and whatever Dad had scraped together from odd jobs around town. I thought about Maddie upstairs, probably fast asleep with her stuffed rabbit. She didn't know about any of this. Mom and Dad had been careful to keep their voices down when they talked about money, but I'd heard enough through the thin walls to piece it together. The missed mortgage payments, the second notice from the bank, the phone calls Dad ignored. I'll find work, I said. Good work. Something that pays decent. Caleb, we've been through this. Dad's voice sounded tired. There's nothing around here that pays enough to make a difference. But I couldn't just stand there and watch him count those same bills again. I had to try something. The next morning I drove our old pickup into town. The engine made that rattling noise it had been making for months, and I had to pump the brakes twice at every stop sign. But it got me where I needed to go. I hit every business on Main Street. The diner, the auto shop, the feed store. Same story everywhere. They weren't hiring, or they were only offering minimum wage part-time work. $7.25 an hour, maybe 15 hours a week if I was lucky. I did the math in my head and wanted to punch something. That wouldn't even cover groceries, let alone help with the mortgage. At the grocery store, Mrs. Henderson told me she was sorry, but they'd just cut hours for their current employees. At the gas station, the manager said he'd keep my name on file, which we both knew meant no. The bank had a now hiring sign in the window, but when I walked in and asked about it, the woman behind the counter looked me up and down and said the position required a college degree. I was walking back to the truck when I saw the sign. It was handwritten on a piece of cardboard, tacked to the bulletin board outside Morrison's hardware store. The ink had faded some like it had been there a while, but I could still read it clearly. Farm work, good pay, serious inquiries only. Perry Farm, Route 47. Perry Farm. I'd heard that name my whole life, always in hushed conversations that stopped when kids walked into the room. People in town talked about it the way they talked about the old cemetery or the abandoned mine shaft, with a kind of careful respect that made you wonder what they weren't saying. The farm sat on some of the best land in the county, rich soil that should have been producing crops year-round. But I'd driven past it plenty of times, and I'd never seen anyone harvesting anything. Never seen farm equipment in the fields or trucks loaded with produce heading to market. The place just sat there, acre after acre of overgrown fields behind a weathered fence. But good pay was good pay. And we needed $8,000. I tore the sign down and walked into the hardware store. Morrison was behind the counter, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Okayest Dad." "How long's that sign been up?" I asked, showing him the cardboard. Morrison glanced at it and shrugged. "Few weeks, maybe." "You thinking about applying?" "Maybe. You know anything about the job?" He folded his newspaper and gave me a long look. "You sure about this, Caleb? I mean, your family's situation and all, but Perry Farm." He trailed off. "What about it?" "Nothing specific. Just stories, you know? People talk." "What kind of stories?" Morrison picked up his coffee mug and set it back down without drinking. "Look, Samuel Perry's not a bad man. Keeps to himself, pays his bills on time, doesn't cause trouble, but that place has always been different." "Different how?" "Hard to say exactly. Folks who've worked out there, they don't talk much about it afterward. And the ones who do, well, they don't stay long." I thought about Dad counting those bills, about Maddie sleeping upstairs with no idea her whole world might disappear. "I need the work, Mr. Morrison." He nodded slowly. "I figured as much. Just be careful, all right? And if something doesn't feel right, you don't owe anybody anything. Remember that." The drive to Perry Farm took about 20 minutes on Route 47. I'd passed the entrance plenty of times, but never really looked at it. A gravel road disappeared between two weathered fence posts, with a simple wooden sign that said Perry Farm in faded black letters. I turned down the gravel road and drove slowly between overgrown fields. The land was good, better than what we had at home, but nothing was growing except weeds and wild grass. A few old fence posts leaned at odd angles, and I could see the remains of what might have been crop rows from years past. The farmhouse sat about a quarter-mile from the road, a 2-story white building with a wraparound porch and green shutters. It looked well-maintained, unlike the fields. Behind it stood a large red barn and a few smaller outbuildings, all in decent shape. I parked near the barn and got out. The silence hit me first. No sounds of machinery or animals, no voices calling across the yard. Just wind moving through the tall grass and the distant sound of crows. "You hear about the job?" I turned around and saw a man walking out of the barn. Tall and lean, probably in his 50s, with graying dark hair and the palest blue eyes I'd ever seen. He wore dark work clothes and boots, and he moved with the kind of careful precision that made you pay attention. "Yes, sir. I'm Caleb Maldonado. Samuel Perry." He didn't offer to shake hands, just looked at me with those pale eyes. "You ever done farm work before?" "Yes, sir. My family has a small operation about 20 minutes from here. I know the place." He said it like he knew more than just the location, but didn't explain. "This job's different than what you're probably used to. The work's not hard, but it requires following instructions exactly. No shortcuts, no improvising, no questions. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. $300 a day, cash, paid at the end of each shift. Work starts at 5 a.m. sharp, and ends when I say it ends, usually around 6 p.m. $300. I tried not to let my surprise show, but that was more money than I'd ever made in a single day. More than some people in town made in a week. "That sounds fair," I said. "Fair's got nothing to do with it. It's what the job pays." Samuel studied my face. "But before you say yes, you need to understand the rules. There are 6 of them, and they're not negotiable." He held up one finger. "First, you arrive at exactly 5 a.m., not 4:55, not 5:05, 5 a.m. Second finger. Second, you work alone. Don't talk to anyone else who might be on the property unless I introduce you first. Third finger. Third, you stay away from the farmhouse. Your work will be in the fields and the barn. No reason to go near the house. Fourth finger. Fourth, you bring your own lunch and water. Don't expect to use the kitchen or ask for anything from the house. Fifth finger. Fifth, you leave when I tell you to leave. Don't linger. Don't ask questions about tomorrow's work. Just go." He paused before raising his 6th finger. "Sixth, there's an old man in overalls who sometimes walks around the property. If you see him, you ignore him completely. Don't talk to him. Don't acknowledge him. Don't even look at him if you can help it. Act like he's not there. The last rule made my skin crawl, but I thought about $8,000 in Dad's hollow eyes. "I can follow those rules," I said. "You sure? Because if you break any one of them, you're done. No warnings, no second chances, and you don't get paid for that day." "I understand." Samuel nodded once. "Be here tomorrow at 5 a.m. I'll show you what needs doing." I got to Perry Farm at 5 a.m. exactly. The truck's headlights cut through the dark as I pulled up the gravel drive. No light showed in the farmhouse windows, but Samuel stepped out of the barn like he'd been waiting. "You're on time," he said. "Good." The morning air was cold, and I could see my breath. Samuel walked me to the barn and showed me what needed doing. The stalls hadn't been cleaned in days, maybe weeks. Manure and old hay covered the floors, and the smell hit me hard. "Start here," Samuel said, pointing to a wheelbarrow and shovel leaning against the wall. "Clean all 6 stalls. Fresh hay's in the loft." He walked me through the rest of the tasks. The tool shed needed organizing. Hammers mixed with screwdrivers, nails scattered everywhere, coils of wire tangled in corners. After that, fence repairs along the north pasture where posts had come loose. "Take your time, but do it right," Samuel said. "I'd rather have it done properly than fast." He left me alone after that. I started with the stalls, shoveling out the old mess and wheeling it to a compost pile behind the barn. The work was hard but straightforward. Nothing I hadn't done before on our own farm, back when we had animals to care for. The hours passed steady. I cleaned the stalls and spread fresh hay, organized tools by type and size, found a box of fence staples that had been buried under paint cans and rope. By 10 a.m. I was sweating despite the cool air. Samuel checked on me once around 11. He looked over the clean stalls and nodded. "Good work," he said. "Keep going." That was it. No small talk, no questions about my family or why I needed the job. Just business. I moved on to the fence repairs. The north pasture stretched maybe 2 acres, bordered by old wooden posts and rusted wire. 3 posts had worked loose from the ground, and the wire sagged in several places. I dug out the loose posts and reset them deeper, packing dirt and rocks around the base. Then I tightened the wire and added new staples where the old ones had pulled free. The sun climbed higher and I worked up a real sweat. Around noon, I was carrying a bag of chicken feed from the barn to a small coop I'd noticed earlier. The coop sat maybe 50 feet from the farmhouse, closer than I'd been all morning. That's when I saw him. An old man stood on the farmhouse porch. He wore faded blue overalls and a white shirt underneath. His hair was completely white and thin on top. He had to be 80 at least, maybe older. He stood perfectly still, watching me. My steps slowed. This had to be the old man Samuel warned me about, the one I was supposed to ignore completely. "Hey there," the old man called out. His voice carried clear across the yard. "Come over here a minute." I kept walking toward the chicken coop. My heart started beating faster. "I said come here," the old man called again. "I got something for you." I didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him at all, just kept walking like Samuel told me, act like he's not there. But I could feel the old man's eyes on me, could hear his feet moving on the porch boards. "Boy, I'm talking to you," he said louder now. "Don't you ignore me." My hand shook as I carried the feed bag. The chicken coop seemed miles away, even though it was only 20 more steps. I wanted to run, but forced myself to walk normal speed. "I know you can hear me," the old man said. His voice had an edge to it now. "I got something that belongs to you. Something important." That made me want to turn around. What could he possibly have that belonged to me? I'd never been here before, never met him. But I remembered Samuel's warning, no second chances, break the rules and I was done. I reached the chicken coop and fumbled with the latch. My hands were definitely shaking now. The old man had gone quiet, which somehow felt worse than his calling out. I poured the feed into the trough inside the coop. A few chickens clucked and moved around, but I barely noticed them. All I could think about was the old man behind me. When I finished with the feed, I had to walk back past the farmhouse to reach the barn. I didn't want to, but there wasn't another route that made sense. I started back across the yard, keeping my eyes down. Didn't look toward the porch at all. "You're making a mistake," the old man said as I passed. His voice was quieter now, but somehow more unsettling. "A big mistake." I kept walking. Made it to the barn and ducked inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood there in the dim light, trying to calm down. What did he mean about having something that belonged to me? And why was Samuel so specific about ignoring him? The old man seemed harmless enough, just standing on the porch. But something about his voice, the way he kept insisting I come over, made my skin crawl. I stayed in the barn for maybe 10 minutes before I worked up the nerve to look outside. When I finally peered around the barn door, the porch was empty, no sign of the old man anywhere. The rest of the day passed without incident. I finished the fence repairs and cleaned up the tools. Samuel found me around 6:30 and looked over everything I'd done. "That'll do," he said. "Be here same time tomorrow." He handed me an envelope. Inside were 3 $100 bills, crisp and new. More cash than I'd ever held at one time. "Thank you," I said. Samuel nodded and walked away. I got in the truck and drove home, the envelope tucked in my shirt pocket. The money felt real enough, solid and important. But I couldn't stop thinking about the old man and what he'd said. Something that belongs to you. Something important. I pushed the thoughts away. I had a job that paid $300 a day. My family needed this money. Whatever game the old man was playing, I couldn't afford to get caught up in it. The second day started the same way. 5 a.m. arrival, Samuel waiting by the barn. He gave me different tasks this time. Clearing brush from around the outer buildings, checking water lines to the animal troughs, moving hay bales from one storage area to another. All the work kept me far from the farmhouse. I wondered if Samuel planned it that way after seeing the old man yesterday. Or maybe it was just coincidence. Either way, I was grateful. I worked steady through the morning without any sign of the old man. No voice calling from the porch, no feeling of being watched. Just me and the tasks at hand. By lunchtime, I was actually starting to relax. The work was manageable, even satisfying in a way. Physical labor with clear goals and decent pay. I could do this job for weeks if needed, maybe long enough to save the farm. The old man never appeared. When Samuel dismissed me at 7 p.m. and handed over another envelope with $300, I felt something close to relief. 2 days, $600. Real money that could help my family keep our home. The water trough sat crooked against the barn wall. One corner dipped into the dirt where the wooden support had rotted through. I'd been working on it for about an hour, trying to level it out with some spare lumber Samuel had pointed me toward. The morning air was cool, but I could already feel sweat on my back from hauling the thing around. I heard footsteps on gravel behind me. My hands went still on the hammer. Samuel usually moved quiet, and these steps had a different rhythm. Slower, more deliberate. I turned around. The old man was walking toward me from the direction of the farmhouse, maybe 30 feet away. He carried something in his hands, a mason jar filled with yellow liquid that caught the morning light. His white hair was combed neat today, and his overalls looked freshly washed, but his eyes had that same sharp focus I remembered from before. "Morning there, son," he called out. His voice was friendly enough, but it made my stomach tighten. "Looks like you're working up a sweat already." I set the hammer down and wiped my hands on my jeans. Samuel's rules echoed in my head. Ignore the old man completely. Don't speak to him. Don't acknowledge him at all. The old man kept walking closer. "Brought you something better than that warm water you got there." He held up the jar. Fresh lemonade. Family recipe my grandmother used to make. Sweet and tart, just the way it should be. I picked up the hammer and turned back to the trough. My hands wanted to shake, but I forced them steady. Just keep working. Act like he's not there. Now that's just plain rude, the old man said. His voice was closer now, maybe 10 feet behind me. Man offers you a cold drink on a warm morning. Decent thing to do is acknowledge it. I hammered a nail into the support beam. The sound was loud in the quiet air. I'm talking to you, boy. I hammered another nail, then another. The old man's shadow fell across the trough. Fine drink going to waste, he said. Cold as well water, twice as refreshing. Your throat's probably dry as dust by now. I reached for my water bottle sitting on the ground nearby. The plastic was warm from the sun, but I took a long drink anyway. The old man watched me do it. That's not going to help you much, he said. Not on a day like this. It gets hot fast around here and you got hours of work left. I capped the water bottle and picked up another nail. The old man stepped closer, close enough that I could smell something sweet and cloying coming off him. Not just the lemonade, something else underneath it. My grandmother made this recipe during the Depression, he said. Kept the whole family going through some hard times. Gives you strength when you need it most. Energy to keep working. The nail went crooked when I hit it. I had to pull it out and start over. I can see you're struggling some, the old man continued. Young man like you shouldn't be having trouble with simple carpentry. This here drink would fix that right up. I stood up and gathered my tools. Time to move to a different part of the barn, maybe around the other side where Samuel might see if the old man followed. Where you going, son? The old man's voice got sharper. I'm trying to be neighborly here. I walked toward the corner of the barn, tools in hand. The old man's footsteps followed behind me on the gravel. It's rude to walk away when someone's talking to you, he called out. Rude to refuse hospitality when it's offered. I kept walking. The barn's corner would put me closer to where Samuel usually worked in the mornings. Maybe the old man would back off if he thought Samuel might come around. Your mama didn't raise you right, did she? The old man's voice was getting louder. Didn't teach you proper manners. My jaw clenched, but I didn't turn around. Just keep walking. Follow the rules. Don't acknowledge him at all. I said your mama didn't raise you right. The words hit like a slap, but I forced myself to keep moving. Around the corner of the barn now, into the shade on the north side. The old man's footsteps still followed. You're going to drink this, he said. His voice had changed completely. No more friendly neighbor tone. This was hard and cold. You're going to turn around and take this jar and drink every last drop. I set the tools down by a fence post that needed work and reached for the wire cutters. My hands were shaking now and I couldn't hide it. I'm talking to you. The old man's voice cracked like a whip. You look at me when I'm talking to you. I cut a piece of wire and started wrapping it around the loose post. The old man moved around to where I could see him in my peripheral vision. His face was red now, the friendly expression completely gone. Drink it, he said. Drink it now. His voice had dropped to almost a whisper, but there was something in it that made my skin crawl, something that didn't sound quite human. Drink it, or you'll be sorry. I dropped the wire cutters and started walking fast toward my truck. Not running yet, but close to it. The old man's footsteps quickened behind me. Where do you think you're going? He shouted. I'm not done with you. I broke into a run. Behind me, I heard the old man's voice rise to a howl. You ungrateful little bastard. You think you can just ignore me? You think you can just walk away? My truck was 50 yards away across the open ground between the barn and the driveway. I ran as hard as I could, boots pounding on the packed dirt. Behind me, the old man was still shouting. You'll drink it eventually. You'll drink it, and you'll thank me for it. You can't avoid me forever. I reached the truck and yanked the door open. My hands fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before I got them in the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try. In the rearview mirror, I could see the old man standing about 50 yards away, still holding that mason jar. His face was twisted with rage, mouth open in a snarl that showed too many teeth. But it was his eyes that made me floor the gas pedal. They were glowing, not reflecting the sunlight or anything normal like that. Actually glowing with a pale yellow light that had nothing to do with the sun. I drove away as fast as the old truck would go, gravel spraying behind me as I hit the main road. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel steady. That evening, I sat on my front porch steps, staring out at our dying fields and thinking about quitting. $600 in 2.5 days was more money than I'd ever seen, but it wasn't worth whatever was wrong with that old man. Through the kitchen window, I could hear Mom and Dad talking in low voices about the mortgage payment. Maddie was upstairs doing homework, probably worrying about things no 8-year-old should have to think about. I thought about Dad's face when he'd counted that $49. The way his hands shook. The way Mom stared out at the fields like she was already saying goodbye to them. The money was too important to give up. I got to the farm at 5 a.m. like always. But this time Samuel was waiting for me by the barn door. His face looked different, harder. The kind of expression my dad got when he found fence posts knocked down by the neighbor's cattle. "We need to talk," Samuel said. I shut off the truck and walked over. The morning air felt colder than usual, and I could see my breath when I spoke. "Something wrong with yesterday's work?" "No." Samuel crossed his arms. "You had trouble yesterday." It wasn't a question. I stopped walking and looked at him. "How'd you know?" "I know everything that happens on this property." Samuel's pale blue eyes stayed fixed on mine. "Tell me what happened." I thought about lying, making up some story about finishing early and leaving. But something in Samuel's voice told me that wouldn't work. The old man came around while I was fixing the water trough. Had a jar of something. "Lemonade," he said. Wanted me to drink it. Samuel nodded slowly. "And you didn't?" "No." Followed the rules, ignored him completely and left when he got too close. "Good." Samuel's expression relaxed just a bit. That was the right choice. "What would have happened if I'd taken it?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. He looked toward the farmhouse, then back at me. "Nothing good. The old man's not what he seems, Caleb. He's been here longer than I have. Longer than anyone should be anywhere. The way he said my name made my skin crawl. I'd never told Samuel what I was called. Only said I was looking for work that first day. "He knows my name," I said. "He knows a lot of things. That's why the rules exist." Samuel turned toward the barn. "He'll try again. Probably today, maybe tomorrow. But you keep doing what you did yesterday and you'll be fine." "What if he doesn't give up?" Samuel pulled open the barn door. "He will. Eventually, they all do." I wanted to ask what he meant by "they all," but Samuel was already walking inside. I followed him through the dim barn to the far end, where he pointed to a stack of fence posts and a toolbox. "You're working the south pasture today, farthest field from the house. Take the truck and load these posts. There's a section of fence down near the creek that needs rebuilding." I looked at the posts. Each one had to weigh 60 pounds, and there were at least 20 of them. "How many you want me to take?" "All of them. And the wires in that shed over there." Samuel pointed to a small building I hadn't noticed before, set back in the trees about 100 yards away. "You'll be out there most of the day. Good place to work without interruption." I understood what he was getting at. Far from the farmhouse meant far from the old man. At least, I hoped it did. It took me an hour to load everything. The fence posts were heavier than they looked, and the wire came in rolls that kept trying to unwind while I wrestled them into the truck bed. Samuel checked on me once, nodded at my progress, and disappeared back into the barn. The south pasture was a 20-minute drive down a dirt road that wound through thick woods. I'd never been this far onto Samuel's property before. The road ended at a gate that opened onto about 10 acres of grassland with a creek running along the far edge. The broken fence section was easy to spot, posts leaning at crazy angles and wire hanging loose like broken guitar strings. I spent the morning pulling out the old posts and digging new holes. The work felt good, honest, the kind of thing I'd been doing on our farm since I was 12. My hands knew how to handle the post hole digger, how to set the posts straight and tamp the dirt down tight. Around noon, I took a break and sat on the truck tailgate to eat the sandwich I'd packed. Turkey and cheese on white bread, same as always. Mom had started making my lunch again without me asking, probably because she'd noticed the cash I'd been bringing home. We hadn't talked about where the money was coming from, but she knew it was more than any normal job around here would pay. The creek made a quiet, bubbling sound as it flowed over the rocks. A few birds called from the trees. Otherwise, the place was completely silent. No traffic noise, no machinery, no voices. Just me and the work and the sound of water moving downstream. I was setting the fourth new post when I heard someone calling my name. The voice came from across the field, thin and distant, but clear enough. I looked up from the post hole and saw a figure standing at the tree line about 200 yards away. Even from that distance, I could tell it was the old man. But something was different about him. Instead of the faded overalls he'd worn before, he was dressed in a black suit, the kind people wore to church or funerals. He stood perfectly still, like a scarecrow, but I could feel him watching me. "Caleb!" he called again. His voice carried across the field without any trouble, even though he didn't seem to be shouting. "I know your name now." I kept my eyes on the post and started shoveling dirt into the hole. The rules were clear. Ignore him completely. Don't acknowledge him in any way. Just keep working. I know all about you, boy. All about your family. The shovel felt heavier in my hands. I forced myself to keep moving dirt, to focus on getting the post level and straight. But the old man's voice seemed to cut right through my concentration. "Your daddy owes money he can't pay back, doesn't he? $8,000 by the end of the month." My hands stopped moving. I hadn't told anyone at Perry Farm about our situation. Not Samuel, not anyone. There was no way this old man could know about the mortgage payment. That's a lot of money for a man who's got $49 to his name. The shovel slipped from my hands and hit the ground. $49. The exact amount Dad had counted at the kitchen table. The exact amount that had been all we had in the world. And little Maddie, sweet little girl, goes to bed hungry some nights, doesn't she? Something cold and sharp twisted in my chest. I picked up the shovel and started working again, faster now, trying to drown out the words with the sound of metal scraping against dirt and rocks. "I can fix all that, Caleb. Make it so your family never has to worry about money again. Your daddy could pay off that mortgage tomorrow. Buy Maddie all the food she wants." I tamped dirt around the post with more force than necessary. The old man's voice was getting closer, though when I glanced up, he still seemed to be standing in the same spot at the tree line. All it takes is one little drink, one sip, and all your problems disappear. Your mama could get her medicine for that arthritis. Your daddy could hold his head up in town again. The words hit me like physical blows. How did he know about Mom's arthritis? About Dad's shame when he had to ask for credit at the feed store? These weren't things I'd told anyone. These weren't things anyone outside our family should know. One sip, Caleb. That's all. And you can save them all. I moved to the next section of fence and started pulling out another broken post. The old wood was rotted at the base and came out easier than expected, sending me stumbling backward. When I looked up again, the old man was still there, still watching, still wearing that black suit that seemed too formal for a farm. "You think working for Samuel's going to be enough? $300 a day? That's good money, but it's not enough. Not nearly enough. You'd have to work for months to make what your family needs." I knew he was right. Even at $300 a day, it would take most of a month to earn $8,000. And that was assuming Samuel kept me on that long. Assuming nothing went wrong. Assuming I could keep following the rules while this old man kept trying to break me down. But I can give you everything you need right now. Today, this minute. I started digging a new post hole. The ground was harder here, full of rocks and roots that fought back against the digger. Sweat ran down my face despite the cool air. Your family's counting on you, boy. You're their only hope. And you're going to let them down because you're too stubborn to accept help when it's offered. The post hole digger hit something solid. I worked it around the obstacle and kept digging. My hands were starting to blister, but I didn't stop. Maddie's going to cry herself to sleep tonight, wondering why her big brother couldn't save them. Your mama's going to pack up her things and try to figure out where they can go when the bank takes the house. Your daddy's going to break, Caleb. He's going to break completely, and it'll be your fault. I threw the post hole digger down and grabbed a new fence post from the truck. The wood was rough and heavy, and splinters bit into my palms. I didn't care. The pain felt better than listening to the old man's words. One drink, that's all it takes. One little sip, and you save them all. I set the post in the hole and started shoveling dirt around it. Each word the old man spoke felt like a weight pressing down on my shoulders, but I kept working, kept following the rules, kept ignoring him even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to listen. You can't run from this forever, boy. You can't pretend I'm not here. Sooner or later, you're going to have to choose between your pride and your family. The dirt felt heavier with each shovelful. My back ached and my hands burned, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't slow down. If I stopped working, if I let myself think too hard about what the old man was saying, I might do something stupid. They're going to lose everything, Caleb. Everything. And you'll have to live with that for the rest of your life. I finished tamping the dirt around the post and moved to the truck to get more wire. The old man's voice followed me across the field, each word echoing off the trees and the water. All their suffering, all their pain, all because you were too proud to accept a simple gift. I loaded my arms with wire and headed back to the fence. The old man was still there, still watching, still wearing that black suit that made him look like an undertaker. His voice carried across the distance between us without any effort, like he was standing right next to me. You think you're being strong, but you're just being selfish. Think about Maddie, Caleb. Think about your little sister. I started stringing wire between the posts, pulling it tight and fastening it with staples. The work required concentration, and I tried to focus on that, instead of the words that kept coming from across the field. She trusts you. She believes her big brother's going to make everything better. Don't let her down. The hammer slipped in my sweaty grip and nearly caught my thumb. I wiped my hands on my jeans and kept working. Wire, staple, hammer. Wire, staple, hammer. Simple, repetitive motions that I could do without thinking. Your family's going to be destroyed, and it'll be your fault, your choice, your failure. I finished the section I was working on and loaded the remaining posts into the truck. There was more fence to fix further down the creek, and the old man's voice was starting to fade as I drove away from him. But I could still hear the echo of his words in my head, and I knew he was right about one thing. My family was counting on me, and $300 a day might not be enough to save them. The next morning, I was back at 5 sharp. Samuel waited by the barn like always, but his face looked different. Harder somehow. "We need to talk," he said. I followed him into the barn. He turned around and looked at me straight on. "I know what happened yesterday," he said, with the old man. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone about the lemonade or running to my truck. "You followed the rules," Samuel said. "That's good. He offered you something to drink, didn't he?" "Yeah," I said. "Lemonade. And you didn't take it?" "No, sir." I ignored him like you said. Samuel nodded. He's been here longer than anyone should be anywhere. He'll try again, but he'll give up eventually. They all do. He handed me a list of tasks written on a piece of notebook paper. South pasture today. Fence work by the creek. Stay down there until I come get you. The south pasture was the farthest field from the farmhouse, 20 minutes down a dirt road through thick woods. I loaded fence posts and wire into the truck bed and drove out there alone. The work was hard but straightforward. Pull the old broken posts, dig new holes, set the posts deep and string wire between them. I'd done fence work before on our farm, back when we could afford materials. Around noon, I took a break and ate the sandwich Mom had packed, turkey and cheese on white bread. She'd added an apple and a thermos of sweet tea. That's when I heard someone calling my name. The voice came from across the field, near the tree line about 200 yards away. I looked up and saw him, the old man. But he wasn't wearing overalls anymore. Now he had on a black suit like he was heading to church or a funeral. "Caleb!" he called out. His voice carried clear across the field without any effort. "I know about your daddy's troubles." I kept working, drove the shovel into the ground and pulled up another chunk of dirt. "He owes $8,000 by the end of the month," the old man said. "And he's got exactly $49 to his name. Ain't that right?" My hands stopped moving. Nobody knew about the $49 except my family. We'd counted it at our kitchen table with the windows closed and the doors shut. "Your little sister goes to bed hungry some nights," the old man continued. "Maddie, isn't it? Sweet little thing with the braids." The shovel slipped from my hands. I picked it up and kept digging, but my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Your mama's arthritis keeps her up at night. She sits in that old rocking chair by the window, rubbing her joints and trying not to wake anybody up. I'd seen Mom do that. Just last week, I'd gotten up for a glass of water and found her in the living room at 2 a.m, working her fingers and wincing. And your daddy's too proud to ask for help," the old man said. "Too ashamed to tell anybody how bad things really are. He went to the feed store yesterday and couldn't even look old Morrison in the eye when he asked for credit." That was true too. Dad had come home from town looking like he'd been kicked in the stomach. "I can solve all of that," the old man called out. "Every last bit of it. Your daddy could pay off that mortgage tomorrow, could buy Maddie all the food she wants. All I need is one little thing from you." I finished setting the post and moved to the next broken section of fence. My hands were shaking now, but I kept working. "One sip," the old man said. "That's all. One little sip, and your family's troubles are over." I strung wire between the posts and hammered in the staples. The old man kept talking, but I focused on the work. Count the staples. Measure the distance between posts. Keep the wire tight and level. "You think your pride is worth more than your family?" the old man asked. "You think $300 a day is going to be enough? You'd need months to make $8,000. Months your family doesn't have." The hammer slipped in my sweaty grip and nearly smashed my thumb. I wiped my hands on my jeans and kept going. "That little girl is going to cry herself to sleep, wondering why her big brother couldn't save them. Your mama's going to pack up her things and wonder where they went wrong. And your daddy's going to know it's his fault, that he failed them all." Something cold and sharp twisted in my chest when he mentioned Maddie. But I kept working, post after post, wire after wire. "Your family's going to be destroyed and it'll be your fault, your choice, your failure." I finished the section I was working on and loaded the remaining posts into the truck. There was more fence to fix further down the creek, and the old man's voice was starting to fade as I drove away from him. But I could still hear the echo of his words in my head. And I knew he was right about one thing. My family was counting on me. And $300 a day might not be enough to save them. But I kept showing up anyway. Every morning at 5 sharp, I parked my truck in the gravel drive and found Samuel waiting. Every day he gave me new tasks that kept me busy from dawn to dusk: clean the equipment shed, repair the roof on the chicken coop, clear brush from around the outbuildings, fix the water lines to the animal troughs, and every day the old man found me. Sometimes he wore the faded overalls, sometimes the black suit. Once he showed up in work clothes that looked exactly like mine, down to the scuffed boots and torn pocket on the shirt. He knew things no stranger should know. He described Maddie's favorite hiding spot behind the house, where she'd built a little fort out of old boards and feed sacks. He talked about Mom sitting up at night, not just from the arthritis, but from worry, staring out the kitchen window at our dying fields. He repeated conversations between me and Dad that we'd had in private, word for word. "She asked you last Tuesday if everything was going to be okay," the old man said one afternoon while I was cleaning tools in the barn. Standing right there by the kitchen sink, drying that old blue dish towel. "And you lied to her, didn't you? Told her not to worry." I'd been organizing wrenches by size, but my hands went still. That conversation had happened exactly like he said. "She knew you were lying," the old man continued. "She's not stupid, that little girl. She sees the way your mama and daddy whisper when they think she's not listening. She knows something's wrong." I forced myself to keep working, put the wrenches back in order, move on to the screwdrivers. "One sip," he said. "That's all it takes. One little sip, and she never has to worry again." But I didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, didn't break Samuel's rules. Some days the old man got angry. He'd curse and threaten and promise that ignoring him would make everything worse. Other days he tried being friendly again, offering different drinks, sweet tea, fresh milk, cold water on the hottest days. "You must be thirsty," he'd say when I was working in the sun. "Awful hot out here. This water's nice and cold, got ice in it and everything." My throat would be dry as dust, and sweat would be pouring down my face, but I never took anything he offered. The worst day was when he showed up while I was fixing a section of barn siding. I was up on a ladder, hammering new boards into place, when I heard his voice right below me. "Your daddy cried last night," he said. The hammer stopped halfway to the nail. Sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands and cried like a baby. Your mama rubbed his back and told him everything would work out, but she was crying too. I drove the nail home with 3 hard strikes and reached for another board. They think they're protecting you and Maddie by keeping quiet about how scared they are, but I see everything that happens in that house, every tear, every sleepless night, every time your mama counts the pills in her arthritis medicine and wonders if she can make them last another week. The board slipped from my hands and clattered to the ground. I climbed down the ladder to get it, and the old man stepped closer. "They're going to lose everything," he said. "The house, the farm, everything your family's worked for. And it's going to happen because you're too stubborn to take one little drink." I picked up the board and climbed back up the ladder. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the hammer. "One sip," he whispered. "That's all. One tiny sip, and your family gets to keep their home." But I kept hammering, kept working, kept following Samuel's rules. And every evening at 7, Samuel would find me wherever I was working and hand me an envelope with $300 cash. 3 crisp $100 bills every single day. By the end of the first week, I had $2,100. By the end of the second week, I had $4,200. Enough to make the mortgage payment, enough for groceries and utilities, enough to keep us going for another month at least. I gave most of it to Dad, keeping just enough for gas and lunch. The relief on his face when I handed him that stack of bills was worth every terrifying encounter with the old man. "Where's this coming from?" Dad asked, counting the money twice. "Farm work," I said. "Good pay." He didn't ask any more questions, just folded the bills carefully and put them in his wallet. That night at dinner, we had meat for the first time in weeks. Pork chops that Mom cooked with potatoes and green beans. Maddie ate 2 helpings and asked for seconds on dessert. "This is really good, Mom," she said, grinning with chocolate cake frosting on her chin. Mom smiled back, the first real smile I'd seen from her in months. "We're going to be okay," I told myself that night, lying in bed and listening to the house settle around me. The rules are keeping me safe, just like Samuel said. The old man's threats were getting more desperate as the days went on, more personal, more cruel, but he never came closer than talking distance. Never tried to physically force anything on me, and I never wavered from Samuel's instructions. 5 a.m, work the assigned tasks. Ignore the old man completely. Leave at 7 sharp. The rules were working exactly like Samuel promised they would. I finished the last section of fence repair around 4:30 and stepped back to check my work. The posts stood straight, the wire stretched tight between them. Samuel had said to make it right, and it looked right to me. The old man hadn't shown up today. 3 hours of solid work without hearing my name called across the field or seeing that black suit at the tree line. My shoulders felt looser without that constant watching feeling. I loaded the leftover wire and tools into the truck bed. Tomorrow would make it 3 weeks exactly. $6,300 total. Add that to what I'd already given Dad, and we'd have enough. More than enough, actually. The drive back to the barn took 15 minutes through the woods. I parked next to the equipment shed and carried the tools inside, hanging them in their proper spots. Samuel liked things organized. I'd learned that the first day. The sun sat low over the farmhouse roof, casting long shadows across the yard. 7 o'clock couldn't come fast enough. I wanted my money, and I wanted to get home. Mom was making pot roast tonight. Maddie had been talking about it all week. I checked my watch, 6:45. Close enough. The barn felt different without the constant worry about where the old man might appear next. Quieter, somehow. I sat on a hay bale and waited, watching dust particles drift through the late afternoon light coming through the high windows. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Samuel's boots, not the old man's shuffling steps. I stood up and brushed hay off my jeans. Samuel appeared in the doorway, envelope in hand like always, but his expression looked different tonight. Less stern, almost satisfied. "You finished the south fence?" he asked. "Yes, sir, all of it." He nodded and handed me the envelope. $300, same as every day for 3 weeks. "You did well, Caleb." Something in his tone made me pause. "Thank you, sir." Samuel studied my face for a moment. Those pale blue eyes seemed to see more than they should. "Most people don't last 3 days here." 3 days? That's usually when they break, when they stop following the rules. He glanced toward the farmhouse. Curiosity gets the better of them. Or fear does. I shifted the envelope to my back pocket. What happens to them, the ones who don't follow the rules? Samuel's eyes grew distant. He looked past me toward the barn's back wall, like he was seeing something I couldn't. They become part of the farm, permanently. A chill ran down my spine despite the warm evening. "What do you mean?" But Samuel had already turned away. "You should go home now. Your family's waiting." I wanted to ask more questions, but something in his voice told me not to. Instead, I nodded. "Yes, sir." "Take care of them," Samuel said without looking back. I walked across the yard toward my truck, gravel crunching under my boots. The envelope felt heavier in my pocket than usual, maybe because I knew it was the last one. The truck started on the first try. I backed out of the driveway and turned onto Route 47, heading toward town. In my rearview mirror, Perry Farm grew smaller behind me. Just before the trees blocked my view completely, I caught a glimpse of movement in one of the farmhouse windows. A figure standing there, watching me leave. The old man, probably. Even from this distance, I could see one hand pressed against the glass. As I watched, the hand lifted, raised up in what might have been a wave goodbye. Or maybe a threat. Maybe a promise that this wasn't over. I pressed harder on the gas pedal and focused on the road ahead. That night, I gave Dad the final $300. He counted all the money twice, then looked at me with tears in his eyes. "This is enough," he said. "More than enough." Mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Maddie danced around the kitchen, singing about pot roast and chocolate cake. Dad asked me one more time where all the money had come from. I told him the same thing I'd been saying for 3 weeks. Farm work, good pay. He didn't push for details. Maybe he sensed I didn't want to talk about it. Maybe he was just too grateful to care. I never went back to Perry Farm. Never drove down Route 47 again if I could help it. The work was done, the money was earned, and my family was safe. Years passed. Dad paid off the mortgage and started turning a profit on our crops again. Mom's arthritis got better with proper medicine. Maddie grew up happy and healthy, never knowing how close we'd come to losing everything. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about Samuel's words, about workers who became part of the farm permanently, about the old man in his black suit calling my name across empty fields. But I never told anyone what happened during those 3 weeks. Not Mom, not Dad, not Maddie. Some stories are better left buried. Occasionally, I'd drive past the turnoff to Perry Farm on my way to other towns. The mailbox was still there, weathered and leaning. The dirt road disappeared into the same thick woods. I never saw Samuel again. Never saw his truck in town or ran into him at Morrison's Hardware. It was like he'd never existed at all. But the money had been real. The work had been real. And the rules I'd followed had kept me safe, just like he'd promised they would. The old man's final gesture stayed with me, though. That hand against the farmhouse window, rising in farewell or warning. I never knew which it was meant to be, and I never wanted to find out. I held the envelope tight in my shirt pocket as I drove away from Perry Farm. $6,300. More than my father had seen in months, maybe years. The truck's engine rattled worse than usual on the drive home, but I didn't care. Every pothole and bump felt different now. I wasn't driving home empty-handed anymore. The sun was setting behind our fields when I pulled into the driveway. Dad's truck sat by the barn, and I could see him through the kitchen window. He was probably counting those same $49 again, trying to make them stretch into something they couldn't be. I walked up the porch steps with the envelope in my hand. My boots felt heavier than they had in weeks. Not from tiredness, but from what I was carrying, the weight of ending our problems. Mom was at the stove stirring something that smelled like beans and cornbread. Dad sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. The same bills were spread out in front of him, the same crumpled 20s and 5s. Maddie was upstairs. I could hear her humming through the ceiling. "Dad." He looked up. His eyes were red around the edges. I set the envelope on the table next to the bills. "Count it." His hands shook when he picked it up. He opened the flap and pulled out the hundreds. $6,300 in crisp bills that Samuel had given me over 3 weeks of work. Dad's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He spread the bills across the table, counting them twice, then a third time. His fingers smoothed each bill like he was afraid they might disappear. "Where did this come from?" "Farm work. Good pay." Mom turned from the stove. She saw the money and her wooden spoon clattered to the floor. She covered her mouth with both hands. "This is real." Dad's voice cracked. "This is really happening?" "It's real. Count it again if you want." He did. $6,300. Enough for the mortgage payment and then some. Enough to keep the bank from taking our home. Enough to buy groceries without counting every penny. Mom started crying. Not the quiet tears she'd been hiding for months, but real sobs that shook her whole body. She sat down hard in her chair and reached for Dad's hand. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "We're actually going to be okay." Dad folded the bills carefully and put them in his wallet. His hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in months, his face looked like it belonged to my father instead of a stranger wearing his skin. Maddie came downstairs asking what was wrong. Mom hugged her tight and said everything was fine. Better than fine. We were having pot roast tomorrow night, and maybe some of that chocolate cake Maddie liked. That night I lay in bed listening to my parents talk in low voices in their room. Not worried whispers this time. Planning voices. Talking about paying bills and buying seed for next season and maybe fixing the truck's transmission. I'd done it. I'd saved my family by following Samuel's rules exactly. The old man in his black suit could threaten all he wanted. I'd never given him what he was after. The next morning I drove to the bank in town. The teller's eyes widened when I handed over the cash deposit slip. $6,300 doesn't show up every day in a place like this. Savings or checking? She asked. Checking. We've got bills to pay. Dad met me at the bank an hour later. We walked to the loan officer's desk together. Dad pulled out his wallet and counted out the mortgage payment in hundreds. $8,000 exactly. The loan officer stamped the paperwork. Your account is current, Mr. Maldonado. You're all set. Dad shook the man's hand. Outside the bank, he stopped on the sidewalk and looked back at the building. I thought we were going to lose everything, he said. I really thought this was the end. It wasn't. No, it wasn't. We drove home in separate trucks. Dad went straight to the feed store to pay his overdue account. I watched him walk in with his shoulders straight instead of hunched forward like they'd been for months. Morrison waved at me from behind the counter when I passed his hardware store. The help wanted sign was gone from his bulletin board. Someone else had taken the job. I was glad I hadn't needed it. I found work at Henderson's farm outside town 2 weeks later. Regular work, regular hours, regular pay. Nothing strange about it except how normal everything felt after Perry Farm. No rules to follow except showing up on time and doing the job right. The old man's voice stopped echoing in my head after a while. I stopped checking over my shoulder when I worked alone in fields. I stopped thinking about mason jars and black suits and hands pressed against farmhouse windows. Months passed. Dad's crops came in better than they had in years. Mom's arthritis improved when she could afford her medicine again. Maddie grew 2 inches and started talking about joining the school band. Sometimes I drove past the turnoff to Perry Farm on my way to Henderson's place. The mailbox was still there, leaning at the same angle. The dirt road still disappeared into those thick woods. But I never saw Samuel's truck. Never saw any sign that anyone lived back there at all. I wondered about the other workers Samuel had mentioned. The ones who hadn't lasted 3 days. The ones who'd broken the rules and become part of the farm. I wondered what that meant exactly, but I never wondered long enough to go looking for answers. Late at night when the house was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I'd think about the old man's final words, about pride and family, and the price of saving the people you love. I'd think about that hand in the farmhouse window, rising in what could have been goodbye or warning. But mostly I felt grateful. Grateful I'd been desperate enough to take the job and stubborn enough to follow the rules. Grateful Samuel had been willing to pay good money for honest work, even if honest work meant ignoring things that shouldn't exist. Years went by. Maddie graduated high school with honors and got a scholarship to the state university. Dad expanded the farm and bought new equipment. Mom started a small garden behind the house and sold vegetables at the farmer's market on Saturdays. I married Henderson's daughter Sarah and built a house on the back 40 of our land. We had 2 kids of our own and Sunday dinners at my parents' table every week. The family prospered. We became the kind of people who helped neighbors when times got tough instead of needing help ourselves. Dad served on the church council and Mom taught Sunday school. Maddie became a teacher and moved back home after college. I never told any of them about those 3 weeks at Perry Farm. Never mentioned the old man or the rules or the way Samuel's eyes looked when he talked about workers becoming part of the farm permanently. Some stories are better left untold. Sometimes I'd drive past that turnoff on Route 47 and slow down just enough to see if anything had changed. The mailbox got more weathered over the years. Weeds grew higher around the entrance, but I never saw lights in the farmhouse windows or fresh tire tracks in the dirt. Whatever had been happening at Perry Farm seemed to have ended when I left. Or maybe it was still happening, and I just wasn't part of it anymore. Either way, I was content to leave it alone. Maddie got married to a good man who farmed corn and soybeans 3 counties over. Dad walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering how close we'd come to losing everything when she was 12 years old. I watched my family dance at the wedding reception and knew I'd made the right choice all those years ago. The choice to endure those terrifying weeks, to follow rules I didn't understand, to ignore threats that chilled my blood. The old man had been wrong about one thing. Pride hadn't destroyed my family. Following Samuel's rules had saved us.